Basic idea of this paper coming from one of the best Hungarian economists, János Kornai, who was one of the major who studied socialism. His major category to understand how socialism has worked is the soft budget constraint, which is contrasted with the hard budget constraint. Soft budget constraint means that socialist companies hadn't had any constraints on them. This is made in the context of socialism. They were lack of innovation, no care of customers, and shortage. And he is contrasted this with hard budget constraints in the capitalism. The goal of this paper, building on this concept of soft and hard budget constraints, understand the functioning and the implication of the international monetary system. The story begins in 1694, when because of the war between England and Holland, there was established the Bank of England to give a loan to the British state. With this act began a new system of monetary system, the national monetary system. It's very funny, it's not in the literature. The national monetary system is a hybrid monetary system which involves gold coin, that we call in Austrian literature, Feuerschein. The characteristic of this system is not like the pure economic monetary system which we study in Austrian economics, but a mixed economy in which the key actor, the state and the central bank. This national monetary system has three key functions: finance the state, and especially its wars in the 90s then. Secondly, support the credit expansion for the private economy to ensure the background for the state power. And third, ensuring the favorable participation in the international trade, which is the connection to the international monetary system. The key tension of the classical gold standard was it has two different monetary systems. Was the international monetary was pure gold, while the national monetary system was a hybrid of gold and credit money. This led to the passive flow mechanism, which you know from Hume, and it has two consequences. First, the bombast cycles every 7 years, and secondly, it limited the expansion of state power because it couldn't really expand it as much the credit as it wanted. No wonder that the gold standard has collapsed in a great war, which was greater than which was initiated the gold standard. After the 1930s crisis, there was an aim to reconstruct the international monetary system. It was the clear aim to restore a rigid monetary international system in order to serve the flow of goods and trade. But it had two contradictory double goals, those who created the new system. First, they wanted a stable currency among national currencies, like was the gold standard, but also they wanted a room for expansion for the welfare state, unlike the gold standard. This resulted in a Bretton Woods system, which nominated the US dollar as the key currency for international trade and reserve currency for other countries. Only the dollar is exchangeable for gold by other central banks who, for whatever reason, they collect too much dollar reserves. So the first 20 years was the golden age of capitalism, which is called in the literature. But in the 1960s emerged the first tensions. One was the increasing inflation, and the second is the persistent US balance of payment deficit and rapid accumulation of dollar reserves in the national central banks. This led to the crisis of the Bretton Woods system. There were three proposals how to solve this crisis. The first was Charles Kindleberger. All these economists had the years of very important politicians. This is why I'm highlighting them. He said, this is an artificial crisis. Cut the gold link. No crisis anymore. Robert Triffin, we know from the Triffin dilemma, he said, there's a problem. A national currency couldn't serve as an international currency. We have to return, Keynes had the other plan, to the international money, the SDR the IMF should be converted into the World Bank. And finally, Jacques Rueff, who was an Austrian economist, wonderful guy, he said, the key problem is that there is a double pyramiding happening with the Bretton Woods system. Because what is happening that the US reserves in the countries which has US reserves are not staying in the coffers of the national banks, but reinvested into the US money market. And this for these reasons, there's a credit pyramid built in the United States on the reinvested dollars, and the credit pyramid built on the export-oriented states based on the US gold reserves. And he said, this is a boomerang currency. We are in the last minute to end this credit build-up. If not, we would have a major crisis like it was in 1929. What was the solution of the crisis? Cutting the gold, closing the gold window, and emerged a pure US dollar international monetary system, which means that not anymore any reserve constraints blocking the credit expansion, save the fear of politicians. In reality, this is ushered a new golden age. I don't go into, we know this. But the key tension remained. What is the key tensions? The same which was identified by Triffin and Rueff. USD is a reserve currency for the world, internationally, and at the same time, the money for the United States. So what has happened? This is how the trade balance of the United States. Almost you couldn't see how big it was in the 60s, but it became so big. This is the rising indebtedness, ever-increasing budget deficit. Back to Kornai. So what is happening with this pure US dollar monetary system? It's a bit called too complicated the table, but I just go to the core. In state socialism, the state had a hard budget constraints because it had to international trade, it had to have gold or dollar. The companies had a soft budget constraints, and there was economic cycles. In the classical gold standard, for every partner, it was a kind of semi-hard or hard budget constraint for the state and for the companies alike, enforced by the gold. In the pure gold standard, or pure dollar standard, the world has divided into two components. One is the country which is issuing the dollar. The United States government doesn't have any hard control because it issues the money which it needs the world. Consequently, the United States, US companies have a semi-hard budget control. All other countries in the world has a kind of less semi-hard or even hard budget control on their states or on their companies, because once the US dollar reserve is disappearing, they are in trouble. So, and this is a very interesting monetary system, because this is almost, you could say, it is working like the miracle. This is a circulus umbilicus happening. This is a kind of, the symptom is that we have since the 70s or the 80s, since the Walker crisis, we have longer and longer booms and less and shallower busts. And the reason behind this, the US government is always could expand the consumption in the US, providing market for everybody else, and the Fed is limitless money creation power, because it doesn't have any hard constraints, could create as many money as it wants to save the world. This is advantageous to the whole world to a certain extent, because there's always rising tide. And there is no inflationary pressure, because there is a constant competition among export-oriented countries to be on the US market, so they are pushing down the prices. And there is maybe 1 billion people is already in the middle class, but still there is at least 7 billion people who is living in abject poverty and want to enter into the US market and produce. So there is a constant pressure to bring down prices. But there is no miracle without trade-off. And now I want to speak of tragic consequences of this distorted sub-budget capitalism. The real problem is that the United States and its key allies who getting the dollar swaps, and they are not so hard their budget constraint, they could do whatever they want. They could be economic populists, they could promise whatever pension increase, whatever stupid law, they could be very nice, human-oriented, who cares about meritocracy. A friend of mine is teaching in American Business Administration School, and he's telling me there is never a problem the cost. It is never discussed what cost the problem, how to solve it. We have a new political culture. Part of this, the wars of choice, and the MMT is becoming a wise and realistic theory. Why? Because the US is practically working like an MMT country. Back to Kornai again. So we have a strange distortion. And the key of this, we have to understand that the interest of political elite is less than the reserve constraints to allow to achieve their political goals. Be geopolitical, dominance of the world, or inside, buying votes. This is why in the history of money is less and less reserves until we arrive to the pure USD standard. But the one real negative consequence is really for the United States, because it is distorting the internal life of the United States. It always allowing irresponsible terrorist, leftist, statist, whatever you want to say, policies. And there is no constraints. You don't feel the cost because anytime you create dollars, somebody else want to grab and put into its market. Now, there is two key conditions of the seamless functioning of the pure USD standard and the US dominant position, because the key negative consequence for the US is the loss of competitiveness and industrial sense, the industrialization. So the two key conditions is one, countries who are participating should be enough small to be pressed down. Now, Rothbard about Plaza Agreement, how Japan and Germany was forced into the Plaza Agreement, and has to be culturally affiliated with like the US culture, or see US as a savior, like Germany, Hungary, whatsoever country. No? And the second is the US and political business elite has to be moderate, not to spend too much, but we have already said in the 60s that is impossible. And really, we have a dramatic change. This whole system was created in 44. In 71, was even expanded. There was a United States was a dominant global and economic power. But since now we have rise, especially after 2020, the last 20 years, 3 countries, China, Russia, and Iran. None of them is owed their independence to US military prowess, neither dependent on US military defense, and all has its own independent traditional culture for thousands of years. And the China industrialization of China is a mirror process of the industrialization of the United States. And additionally, we have 3 major troubles, 3 key points of tensions: Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, and the Middle East. So there's new challenges and a new changing landscape of geopolitical and geoeconomic power is really questioning whether it is desirable the US standard. So related the true nature of the United States, Rueff termed it as a boomerang money. I think this is a Frankenstein money, which is devour its own creator, causing moral collapse, deindustrialization, and so on. So the solution is return to the gold standard, and this is the best interest of the United States itself, if not, don't want to be like Rome was in there. And finally, and this is the last minute because this is for you also, so which gold standard to go back? I mean, the Enlightenment began after the great religious wars in Europe. And the Enlightenment thinkers thought that the that putting Russians in the politics and in the life and supporting commerce, free civil society which controls the small state could lead to peace and wealth of nations. But Hume, who is one of the key Enlightenment thinkers, already in the middle of the 18th century, he said the Enlightenment is over. We failed. And he said the reason of the failure, the hybrid gold system, is allowing a credit expansion serving the state, and this would lead the new cycle of imperial wars, a new imperium creation. So really, you have the debate with Israel, which is the good gold standard. I couldn't say what is it economically the good one. I'm not in that debate. But if I take into the wider political context into, the pure gold standard is the one gold standard which does not allow the backdoor of credit creation and limits state power and forces state, what was originally imagined by the US founding fathers and the great figures of the Enlightenment, that the state is living from its taxes, and because the citizens could exert control over the state. And the state doesn't have any other income source in which could buy the voters. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andras.